Hello, Den Knowers! This video is to primarily educate us on Juneteenth and why it is marked in the history books. Let's start off with the history of Juneteenth. Juneteenth, also called Freedom Day or Emancipation Day, signifies emancipation of the last remaining enslaved African Americans in the Confederacy. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. This was 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which became official in 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation had little impact on the Texans due to the minimal number of Union troops to enforce the new executive order. However, with the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance. Several attempts to explain this 2.5-year delay between the time of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the acknowledgement receipt of this important news in Texas in 1865 yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And also another is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. All or none of these versions could be true. For some, President Lincoln's authority over the rebellious states was in question. Whatever the reasons, conditions in Texas remained status quo, well beyond what was statutory. Now, let's explore Juneteenth in the 1900s. Due to economic and cultural forces, Juneteenth activities, participants, and annual remembrance began to decline in the early 1900s. However, the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s yielded a resurgence of the Juneteenth celebrations. Again, in 1968, Juneteenth received another strong resurgence through the Poor People's March to Washington, D.C., Reverend Ralph Abernathy's call for people of all races, creeds, economic levels, and professions to come to Washington to show support for the poor. Many of these attendees returned home and initiated Juneteenth celebrations in areas previously absent of such activities. In fact, 2 of the largest Juneteenth celebrations founded after this march are now held in Milwaukee and Minneapolis. On January 1, 1980, Juneteenth became an official state holiday through the efforts of Al Edwards, an African-American state legislator. The successful passage of this bill marked Juneteenth as the first emancipation celebration granted official state recognition in Texas. Edwards has since actively sought to spread the observance of Juneteenth all across America. Juneteenth in modern times. Today, Juneteenth is enjoying a phenomenal growth rate within communities and organizations throughout the country. Institutions such as the Smithsonian, the Henry Ford Museum, and others have begun sponsoring Juneteenth-centered activities. In recent years, a number of local and national Juneteenth organizations have arisen to take their place alongside older organizations, all with the mission to promote and cultivate knowledge and appreciation of African American history and culture. Juneteenth today celebrates African American freedom and achievement, while encouraging continuous self-development and respect for all cultures. As it takes on a more national, symbolic, and even global perspective, the events of 1865 in Texas are not forgotten. The future of Juneteenth looks bright as the number of cities and states creating Juneteenth communities continues to increase. Respect and appreciation for all of our differences grow out of exposure and working together. Getting involved in supporting Juneteenth celebrations create new bonds of friendship and understanding among all of us. Many U.S. companies are observing Juneteenth as a work holiday. You can find a lot of information as you research and read on Juneteenth. We hope by watching this video, you have gained some insight into the history of Juneteenth and what Juneteenth signifies. And if you didn't know, now you do.